Okay, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be able to present this topic today, and I just want to thank you for listening in. And I really hope it helps you consider different and, in my experience, more effective ways to deliver enterprise software user adoption in the future. So over the next 25 to 30 minutes or so, I want to discuss what it means when we speak about the new world of learning and consider the impact that this has on long-term user adoption. I also want to consider some aspects of this new approach to learning that can have a huge positive impact on user adoption in the long run. They include digital adoption platforms, DAPs, or as they were previously known, electronic performance support systems, which provide tailored, task-focused learning in the flow of work. The idea of just-in-time learning, where supports are available to software users when they have the greatest need, and the critical impact of failure analysis, a tool used in the 5 moments of need methodology, which can help drive the conversation towards a more efficient and user-centric approach to learning delivery in enterprise software adoption projects. Before we jump right into the solutions though, I am going to outline what I see as the problems companies can face by following the traditional old world of learning for software implementation projects. In my experience, if your client isn't ready or hasn't got the right leadership support, funding, or approach to learning content, well, then it's going to be much more difficult to make DAPs an effective part of your learning delivery approach. So before I begin, I might just give a bit about my background, if I may. I am an SAP Enable Now consultant and 5 moments of need designer. I have worked for many years creating user adoption content for enterprise software solutions. My focus has been on helping companies maximize the user adoption potential of their learning content by focusing on the learner's need. Recently, I've been helping companies meet their business goals by developing different channels for content delivery, including digital adoption platforms, which I'm hoping we'll look at later on. Okay, so getting back to user adoption problem and some key organizational readiness points that can really impact it, particularly as they relate to remote workers. To start with, I want you to consider the importance of a user adoption strategy. For some here, your experience, I'm sure, has been that your clients have user adoption down to a fine art. And honestly, that's the case. That's fantastic. However, I feel for others, your experience has been a little bit different, and you might find some clients struggle to drive user adoption. So I'm just going to start by saying, in my experience, enterprise software user adoption is difficult. And we've probably all seen how difficult it can be to help our clients to empower their employees. We often rush to go live, we get over the line and rush on to the next project. And very often we're leaving behind users to fend for themselves, hoping that what we've stood up in training will support them. But why is user adoption difficult though? User adoption, as it relates to software implementations in its simplest definition, is really the act of a user taking on a new or updated piece of software to complete tasks that previously couldn't be done or were done using a different piece of software. The reality is, however, that user adoption is anything but simple. As human behavior, well, it's a key consideration. Successful user adoption involves many different facets, from change management to measuring success to user enablement. And it's this last one I feel is what concerns us here today, as learning is a key part of that facet. So the first thing to clarify, in case there's any confusion, is that I feel user adoption is not just training. And for some of the organizations that I work with, this really requires a mindset change. I define training as, well, we define training, I suppose, as what is required at the go-live stage to train users on high criticality processes and foundational information. But that's not the whole of user adoption. And so we often like to tell clients when we're getting them around to this mindset change, using training alone to drive user adoption, as some companies like to do, well, it's kind of like using a shovel to drill a hole. You'll get it done, but it's not the best approach. So what can make user adoption so difficult? Well, for one thing, a lack of organizational readiness. You've got to ask yourself, is your client's organization ready? Have they got a digital adoption strategy, not a training plan, in place? And if so, who owns that strategy? Who pays for it? Particularly post go live. Does it cater for the needs of today's learners who may seek quick and targeted knowledge due to a shorter attention span and so have a stronger preference for micro or even nano content? Does it consider the use of digital technology advances, such as mobile learning and adaptive learning systems? Does it take into account learners' expectations to have that personalized, immersive, maybe role-specific and on-demand learning experience? Does it consider diverse learning styles and preferences? And finally, how does it cope with remote and hybrid work models that have necessitated more flexible and accessible learning solutions, which can accommodate dispersed teams and virtual collaboration? Speaking of working remotely, over the decades with the improvement of telecommunication technology and the push for employees, the percentage rate of work from home employees worldwide was on a steady rise. Due to the impact of COVID in 2020, well, that number shot up to over 50% of employees able to work from home actually doing so. Now, we can all see this number has decreased in recent years, but it's actually now holding steady at around 28%, which is a massive jump up from the 7% it was just 5 years ago. Another thing that makes user adoption so difficult these days is the pace of technological advance. As I'm sure you all know and experienced, modern software implementations are usually agile and iterative, rolling out features and changes quarterly rather than every number of years. Changes to processes can often happen during this iterative rollout schedule, with new fields, features, and data very common. This really impacts the effectiveness of a one-time and done traditional training approach, delivered at go live, which in turn can lead to a higher number of support tickets, frustrated employees not knowing how to do their job, and lost productivity due to slower completion of tasks. Another impact traditional training approach has that we need to consider is that, well, very often employees forget about the functionality that the new system provides and just fall back to using the new system to complete the basic tasks they use the old system for, as they struggle to keep up. And, well, honestly, who could blame them? The problem, though, from our client's perspective, is this can in fact undermine the reason for them upgrading or replacing the system in the first place. Another problem the old world of learning has always faced is the forgetting curve. Ebbinghouse's hypothesis revealed, amongst other things, that the memory of learned information is lost over time, and that the biggest loss happens soon after learning, as I'm sure we all know, and we can see quite clearly in this chart. This can be up to 80% of learned information within the first 7 days. Another aspect Ebbinghaus uncovered is that it is easier for the learner to retain information that has meaning. So this is a problem user adoption practitioners must deal with as much today as when Ebbinghaus first developed the forgetting curve. Again, tools and techniques like micro-learning, bite-sized content, and contextualized learning embedded within workflows can help learners apply learnings in practical scenarios and thus improve this knowledge retention problem. Finally, before we finish this section, I want to consider the 70-20-10 model, or as more recently known, the on-the-job, socials and formal OSF model. As the reality is, we all know the 70-20-10 can vary from industry to industry, function to function, and honestly was never meant to be exact percentages in the first place. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept and its proposal that learning should be in 3 buckets, 70, 20, and 10, and that learning support should be developed with these different ways of learning in mind. So considering this, we realize the majority of learning comes from experiential or on-the-job learning, and then through social learning, such as mentoring support, buddying up, and interacting with more experienced team members. And really only a small portion of what we learn comes from the delivery of formal learning, such as instructor-led training or e-learning. This model can help clients consider that mindset change again to driving user adoption, not just the training for go live approach that they may have had previously. While this model has been around for a long time, I think it's still very relevant to the new world of learning. Many companies today heavily rely on training at go live, whereas the reality is, well, it should only be 10% of the learner's experience that you support. Furthermore, we feel that the explosion of remote work in some sectors and professions has altered this, and that more emphasis has been given to formal training delivery because in-office support or mentoring is just too difficult to achieve and inconsistent. At the same time, with the speed and iterative nature of implementations that we just outlined, the time allowed for formal training has decreased, and so learning on the job it's become even more important. So with the loss of or added complexity of maintaining social learning, some companies we feel are unintentionally redrawing that model as an 80-20 model instead. However, even though companies have lost the social learning as an avenue to support user adoption, some are still not supporting the experiential or on-the-job learning to the level that it requires. So, what I'm trying to say is that while formal training, instructor-led or self-directed, it's still vital. It's only part of the user adoption solution. And there is a greater need for learning support and support materials in hypercare and business as usual beyond the formal training delivered before go live. I think this sums it up. There's a more rapidly evolving software landscape, a more widely distributed workforce, still struggling with the forgetting curve, and with less one-on-one support than before. And that's why I want to talk to you today about solutions such as an effective user adoption strategy and using digital adoption platforms with content driven by the output from a critical impact of failure analysis. Okay, so let's consider user adoption strategies and digital adoption platforms. Depending on your own client's organization, consciously or unconsciously, they'll be at different stages of what we like to call user adoption maturity. When we consider a user adoption strategy, we often talk in terms of levels of maturity. And for us, there are 3 stages to consider. The first stage, training to go live, is the one that is most in keeping with that old world of learning where clients get us to develop standard learning content focused on key tasks and processes and deliver it via instructor-led training or self-serve courses prior to go live. The second stage, learning in the flow of work, is moving beyond project into business as usual. We hand over learning content to a client's centralized team who work with and empower business unit super users. This team is responsible for content maintenance and deploying and maintaining all content while making it available to consume in the flow of work. They often work proactively with SMEs and business units to identify issues and provide learning supports on an ongoing basis. Finally, we have the thriving stage. This is where we help clients realize the results of an ongoing user adoption, not just for initial employees, but during an onboarding process for new employees also. Ultimately, we help them create an empowering culture of self-learning in the flow of work. This allows users to learn at their own pace and revisit content as needed, facilitating better adoption, once again by accommodating diverse schedules and learning preferences. It also allows learners to stay up to date with software updates, new features, and evolving best practices. A continuous learning or thriving culture fosters sustained adoption and proficiency over time. As you can see, training is one part of the solution, and albeit an important part, but it's not the entire solution. In our experience, more forward-thinking clients consider user adoption strategy right from the start of a project, as opposed to a rush to go live training strategy. Now let's consider user adoption, or more specifically, user enablement, and how it fits into that implementation project timeline and beyond. Traditionally, given a project timeline of, for simplicity, let's just say 1 year, as displayed here on the screen, teams will break down the build like this in blue, with testing and refining the system running right up to go live. And that's, of course, in an ideal world where things go smoothly and all relevant resources are available. At the same time, typically training might start midway and run right up to go live with end user training, right? The reality, though, is user empowerment and learning should be considered a continuous process and not complete at a set go live state. It really shouldn't stop at go live or even at hypercare for that matter. Sure, training materials need to be ready for go live, particularly material around business critical tasks, but often we cannot know what or how much support an end user will require until they're actively using the new software. Given the iterative and agile nature of software implementations, we also need to consider future training needs covering process changes, and we need to combat that dreaded forgetting curve and look after the training needs of future employees at the same time. Speaking of which, we spoke earlier in the session about how one of the difficulties traditional training faced was learning retention from that single delivery. A solution to this is to provide a repetition of training, particularly at the time of need. But even with modern LMSs, if this is done outside of the system, it's normally provided in a form of macro learning, which takes up employee time for completion. However, in-app guidance provided by a digital adoption platform can contain contextual and role-specific prompting and push notifications alongside contextual just-in-time learning content, which ensure repetition when it is needed most and when it has the most meaning for that specific learner. The image here on screen, developed by SAP, I find is a great way to visualize how to combat the forgetting curve with the support of in-app guidance in the form of a digital adoption platform. More than that, by providing learning in the flow of work and making sure that the core of that learning is task focused with access to additional contextual help, maybe a digital AI buddy or social and collaborative learning opportunities like an integrated forum and support networks that can facilitate knowledge transfer and problem solving, well, we're helping clients address the recent imbalance to that 70-20-10 model. And we're helping clients that was brought on by the rise in remote work, and we're actively supporting the 70 experiential and 20 social learning needs. Okay, so how can we effectively use this in-app guidance? Well, let me talk to you in this section about digital adoption platforms, DAPs, or as I said at the start, they're also known as electronic performance support systems, EPSSs. So, some here in the room may be very familiar with these, and for those of you that aren't, I just want to outline digital adoption platforms are systems that are built into and often overlaying other software to provide real-time in-app guidance in the flow of work. There are many of them, but all the ones that we've encountered universally provide the learner with content built into the system that they're using. This content provides real-time guidance, it is customized, it is task-focused, and it's available again at that moment of need during the flow of work. Some key benefits of DAPs are reducing the support tickets in the business as usual, maximizing the training spend, while enhancing the user's experience, thus driving end user adoption of the software and ultimately creating an end user self-serve mentality. So before we look at modern DAPs, I want to first consider what role they might have in modern learning approach. Well, they provide learners with the right information, guidance and resources at the precise moment they need it, eliminating the need for them to interrupt their workflow and search elsewhere. They provide up-to-date information, instructions and best practices which can be easily accessed, thus empowering the learners to develop their skills and knowledge continuously. Traditional learning methods often create, unintentionally, a gap between the learned content and its application in real-world scenarios, but DAPs bridge that gap by providing that learning at the moment of application. As repetition, context and timeliness are key features of knowledge retention, DAPs provide all three, making knowledge retention much more likely. They can provide a reuse case, an approach for formal learning material, which is used at Go Live, together with a place for learners to access social learning and on-the-job coaching. Finally, and most importantly, I feel, by providing learners with the right support and resources when they need them, DAPs can directly contribute to improved job performance, increase productivity, and achieve those desired business outcomes, which are the ultimate goals of learning support. There are many different digital adoption platforms available on the market at present, but most of them share some common features and traits. These include the ability to only provide contextually relevant learning content in the current location and to the correct audience to ensure that it has value. Embedded assistance, tooltips, pop-up guidance, and users can navigate through different features or workflows. Interactive simulations, walkthroughs that allow learners to practice and rehearse tasks and processes in a safe, risk-free environment. These provide instant feedback, reinforcing correct behavior before learners then can apply the knowledge in the live setting of the system they're in. Integration with knowledge bases or content repositories, allowing learners to quickly access relevant information, troubleshooting guides, or best practices. They include collaboration features such as discussion forums, chat functionality, integrated communication channels, facilitating peer-to-peer learning and problem solving. They often have robust analytics and report capabilities, allowing organizations to track user engagement, performance metrics, and knowledge gaps, which can then help identify areas of further training and support in business as usual. Finally, and in recent times, some DAPs already can incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities to provide intelligent assistance and adaptive learning experience, which can in turn suggest personalized learning paths, recommend relevant resources, or adapt the level of guidance based on the learner's needs and proficiencies. Okay, so I just want to introduce one final concept, if I may, the 5 moments of need learning methodology, and explain how it can help make a business case for the deployment of a digital adoption platform to support learning beyond Go Live. Again, this might be very familiar to some of you in attendance today, but for those that haven't encountered, I want to give a bit of a background to this methodology. Around 15 years ago, Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfredson, working together, devised a method and framework to support people in learning when they needed the most, while they were working. And they called it the 5 moments of need methodology. The methodology provides a foundation for thinking differently about how to support people's learning needs in the flow of their work. It does this by focusing more on the effective on-the-job performance of employees and work teams. It defines 5 different times when learning is needed as new, the first time a process is being learned; more, expanding on existing knowledge; apply, when learners actually carry out the task; solve, when there are unexpected outcomes; and change, new approaches to existing processes. Again, this is even more important these days with that agile and iterative changes that are happening to software processes as they're rolled out. Without going into too much detail on the methodology, I just want to mention that part of focusing on job performance is to analyze what an employee needs to know to do that job. In this way, we would break down the potential learning as follows: a process, a number of tasks that result in the completion of broad performance outcome; tasks, a number of steps that make up a specific performance outcome; step, a specific action that doesn't stand alone but forms part of an overall task. And all of these are supported as well by what's called supporting knowledge, which is additional training material that can add context to a step or task if needed. So how can this methodology help a digital adoption platform work for us and actually even help the use of it make financial sense to our clients? Well, as with most learning approaches, we carry out a comprehensive learning needs analysis to determine the skills, knowledge, and competencies required for successful user adoption. This, together with the role analysis, determines, well, who needs to know what for success. when we bring a DAP into the mix, we're often doing so as a second or even third delivery channel. And in that case, we need to determine, well, what skills, knowledge and competencies this channel will help us deliver to our target audience. Also, with some of the benefits that we've just outlined of learning in the flow of work, well, some of you might be considering this should be the only channel we use. However, in our experience, it's never a good idea to put all your eggs into one basket, and training is still a key element of a robust user adoption strategy. So then how do we decide what learning is included in instructor-led training courses or even e-learning, and what can just be delivered at the moment of need via a DAP? Enter the critical impact of failure analysis. This tool is part of the 5 moments of need methodology that challenges a project team or subject matter expert to determine what the impact to the company or individual might be if they failed in completing each identified task. The benefit of this tool is that while we create learning around all identified tasks and provide them all in the DAP, we can choose to prioritize instructor-led training resources for those where a failure to complete would have a higher impact. This means that rather than being an extra cost, using a DAP can in fact reduce the overall costs, particularly employee downtime required to deliver training. So looking at this example impact scale, when the criticality is, say, for example, between 5 and 7, we may need to provide instructor-led or e-learning courses as training prior to go live, but when the criticality is just 1 to 4, well, it might suffice to just provide the content via the digital adoption platform. In some cases, this can reduce our overall training delivery in half, thus reducing again that employee downtime by using that resource only when it's actually needed. So to bring it back to our earlier problem, we've got a 70-20-10 approach to learning that's breaking down and a forgetting curve that's more keenly felt due these days to the increased pace of software change and rollout. However, we also have a solution to both of these problems, and that is taking on learning in the moment of need and embracing the power of digital adoption platform. Okay, so just to recap, here are a few of the points that I hope I've demonstrated today. I feel I've shown that digital adoption platforms can help drive software user adoption, that an effective user adoption strategy includes more than just training, that supporting users in the flow of work improves user adoption rates, particularly for remote workers, and finally, how successful user adoption helps organizations reduce their support tickets, improve their overall user experience with that software, drive a return on software investment, and ultimately meet their business objectives. Okay, once again, I just want to thank everyone for listening into this video. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Technically Right IT or come to visit us in World of Learning. Thank you.